Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and I'm speaking today with the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson, from God knows where. Where are you today, Matthew?
Only in Sydney today, Tony, not too far away.
Very good. Well, now, last night, which is Thursday, the 27th of June, was the June Ordinary Meeting of Council, and that was a big meeting because on the agenda was the issue about the management of the Dubbo regional livestock markets. And of course, you decided at that meeting, the councillors decided that they will assume, as they say in the press release, full management of those markets. So there's a few ramifications for that, I believe. So one of those is council's going to take responsibility, as they say, for activities consistent with the operation at the Forbes Shire Council livestock markets, including running the scale house operation, ownership of the data from receival of stock through to their departure, and running the draw. So emergency tags will also be issued by council, and changes also include an increase to the fees for the throughput of animals to be structured to realise an additional $1 million in revenue. Now, I should mention that it's been identified that there's been $1 million in revenue as a shortfall when you consider having to put money aside for depreciation of assets. So, Matthew, moving forward, where do we go from here?
So the important thing is that we've made the decision now, and that's something, obviously, a lot of debate and discussion. There was still discussion around sale and lease and keeping it internal. So all that's done, that's behind us now, Tony. Fantastic. And I think the most important thing you said in the intro was that on the 27th of June, at the council meeting, on the night, at the theatre, the decision was made. I know many people thought a decision had been made weeks, months, years ago, but the decision was made on Thursday night. Now that decision has been made, we've now got to make sure that that works as well as possible for the benefit of the community, the benefit of residents and ratepayers, and also the benefit of the operators there. So the decision we've made is, as you said, to bring it internal or to modify that, because the confusing part has been in the past, and this is part of the reason for the service review, there was debate and discussion about where the council role and responsibility finished and where the Dubbo Stock and Station agent started, where the DWSA started. And that makes it difficult for the ACCC, makes it difficult for Office of Local Government, in particular with a public-private partnership. We needed to make sure we've got all that clarified. So the direction forward now is we'll take full control of that. You'll still have agents involved. They'll still be dealing with producers and they'll still be selling. But when you get to the management of the sheep and cattle, when you get to the weighing of the cattle, for example, when you get to the draw of those lots, that's where council staff were the ones totally responsible for that. So that puts the control of that firmly in the hands of council. That's a very good move forward, I believe, and it makes it clear where those lines of responsibility are. The second part, of course, we talked about some fee changes there, and the fees will go up by approximately 32.5% for cattle and 27.4% for sheep. That's the total fee. So that'll put the fees for cattle up to $16 and the fees for sheep up to $2. This is pretty much in line, actually still a bit below other similar sale yards such as Forbes and Wagga. So again, councillors felt comfortable with those prices being still cheaper than other similar sale yards, but an increase to try and generate some additional dollars. I think the other really important thing, Tony, is that there used to be a fee of $12,636.93 as a one-off fee if an agent wanted to start selling at the sale yards. Again, there's a lot of discussion about how hard it was or how easy it was to use the sale yards as an agent in terms of coming along and not being a member of the DWSA. I don't want to get into that debate. There was a lot of discussion back and forth about that. But ultimately now, it is much easier for any agent to sell at the Dubbo regional livestock markets. There'll be a $200 annual fee, so down from $12,000 one-off fee, a $200 annual fee for any agent that wants to be able to sell at the yards. Now, that'll just be making sure we keep our paperwork up to date, to make sure we know where the information they need to be sent, where that has to be sent to. So it's really just to cover some of the basic admin costs for our staff to make sure that is all kept in check. What we believe out of all of this, so all of this debate, all this discussion, we're hoping for a few things. We heard loud and clear from the community the sale yards are important. They inject approximately $60 million into the Dubbo economy, and they wanted council to continue to own that. We believe for the changes we've made, Tony, it will increase the number of agents that are there at the sale yards, so that's good for competition. We also think will increase the amount of throughput for the sale yards. That's good for the amount of injection into the economy that it will produce, and also good for council's bottom line because we obviously get paid on a per head basis, so we want more throughput there. So the agents got what they wanted council to still retain control. The producers, they said loud and clearly they wanted council to still retain the asset, and for the community that have been subsidising this in the past, they will get an increase in the outcome, the net profit or the generation of income for the sale yards, so that'll reduce that burden on the ratepayer, and we obviously plan to get back to the stage where money will go from the sale yards back to the ratepayers of Dubbo to spend on assets and functions and facilities in the area for the Dubbo Regional Council.
Okay, of course. So this means the Dubbo stock and station agents will have less of a role in the operation there, because council's really taken full responsibility for it now, aren't they?
That's right. The Dubbo stock and station agents who manage some of that, the weighing, for example, on the scales, had the computer system, had a license for some software that was used for that. So all of those things will be controlled by council going forward, rather than there were 13 active agents in the Dubbo stock and station agents. So rather than that being the case, who knows, Tony, there could be 20 agents, there could be 25 agents. That competition is good. Competition is always good. So competition will help the producers. More producers want to use the yards. It might even help the producers get a lower commission fee from those agents as that competition increases.
Well, Matthew, moving on to our next topic, another really important topic did come up at the meeting, and I believe Richard Ivey was pretty much at the centre of it, along with residents of Geary, some prominent residents of Geary there who have contributed to the debacle about the Scabbing Flat Bridge and trying to find some answers to upgrade that bridge. So council's made some fairly important decisions about this, haven't they?
We've certainly got a resolution from this. And I want to actually, before I talk about that, I want to applaud Michelle Tompkins and Owen Johns in particular. If ever there was a model, and this was commented at the council meeting by a councillor, if ever there was a model for a way to go about addressing something and getting something to get some positive action through council, the way Michelle Tompkins and Owen Johns did it, I think was an excellent way. They sent information out to councillors, good data, information that we could use. They made phone calls to councillors. They followed up after another council meeting. They made a presentation to a council meeting. They've been at this now for probably, well, in terms of interaction with councillors, probably the last 4 or 5 months, but obviously they've been doing work for longer than that. They didn't think the way to get a decision out of council was to go and jump all over social media and tell councillors how terrible they were and abuse and slander councillors. They didn't think being on the front page of the paper every week was going to win the day. They thought the best way to get a decision was to talk to the decision makers and convince them of their ideas. So I really want to applaud them for the way they went about it. What it resulted in ultimately was a notice of motion brought forward by Councillor Richard Ivey, the Deputy Mayor. And the tricky part here with the Scabbing Flat Bridge is that we're not even really sure, Tony, who's got responsibility. It seems like Transport for New South Wales have taken responsibility for it, but at the same time, they're local roads that lead up to the bridge. So we've got council control to maintain roads, and then suddenly when you get to the bridge, it's a Transport for New South Wales bridge, we think, but maybe it's not. They're doing work on it at the moment. They're increasing the load limit. That won't happen till after harvest, unfortunately, to get that higher load limit. So that's a small problem there, but we need to get a long-term solution there. So the idea here, the whole process was about getting a long-term solution. I do find it a bit frustrating sometimes. The state government says that that's an historical bridge. We can't just go and knock it down and build a new bridge because it's got historical value. Well, I think most people would be more concerned about getting their stock and getting their large vehicles over a bridge in an efficient manner rather than the historical value of the bridge. But put that to a side for a moment. Our resolution from the council meeting last night was that we put together the feasibility of a new bridge to replace or maybe be beside that bridge depending on the historical value. So that's the bridge, the Scabbing Flat Bridge near Geary. And basically we go through that process and then we share that information with Transport for New South Wales. And some of the things in particular, just the suitability of keeping the existing bridge and strengthening it rather than replacing it, the ownership of the bridge, the current bridge, the maintenance of that, and potentially the replacement bridge, who would actually own that, who would fund that, just what the historical significance is of that bridge, and then whether or not there's a need for a replacement bridge that is capable of conveying B-double trucks. So again, we want to make sure we've got the data, the relevant stats, to make sure that that's relevant. We don't want to just go and ask for a bridge that can handle B-doubles, and then the state government looks at that and says, well, no B-doubles use it. We need to back that up with data. And then ultimately, Tony, the costs. What would be the cost for replacement bridge? Once we get all of that information together, then we can start to take the next steps, which would be lobbying the government, working out who's got to pay for it, whether we lobby the government to get funds for council to do it, whether we lobby the government to say, it's your bridge, you need to replace it, really just go down that next step. But I think this is an excellent first step.
Okay, well, lots to be considered there, and very instructive too for anybody wanting to get some problem solved with council, how to go about it. I thought that was really good, and I think everybody should take that on board. Mind you, you were very right. Those two people that you just mentioned were very, very competent at what they were doing. Matthew, you attended an inquiry into local government to fund local government services today. Very curious. I'm very curious about this. I would have thought, seeing that really local government really is a branch of the state government in effect to disperse monies, state government monies, wouldn't you have thought that government would be all over this and communicating and know what's going on already? I just find it odd.
Well, Tony, the Legislative Council does sometimes set up these sort of committees, and they give them work to do. They go around and visit different locations. This particular one, so I'll give you the technical name for it. It's the committee that's in inquiry into the ability of local governments to fund infrastructure and services. So they've been on a bit of a tour since May. They've been through Sydney. They've done 3 meetings in Sydney. They've been to Lismore. They've been to Tamworth. And on Friday, they were in Dubbo, and they meet with various people. And I was invited along as a witness to go along and have a discussion with them about that. There were other local government representatives as well. We saw people from Bathurst, people from Mid-Western Regional Council, Warrenshire Council, Burke. So essentially a number of people there to meet and go through and have a discussion and really put forward the points of view. So I turned up to do that in good faith, and I gave a short introduction about some of the views that I had on behalf of council around funding for local government infrastructure and services. And a couple of sensible questions were asked. There are a number of members of this particular committee, and so a few sensible questions were asked about that. They asked about road funding, how the roads should be funded, the different types of funding. So Sam Farraway was on that particular committee. He's the deputy chair of that. Certainly asked about arts and culture, so some questions asked around those lines. And then it became a bit strange, Tony. This is an inquiry about the overall funding of local government, the overall funding for the ability for us to maintain all of our services, our infrastructure. Essentially, can we be sustainable into the future? And the state government's got a large part to play in this. Suddenly, before I knew it, they were drilling down into how much we were spending on replacing toilets. And I must say, just for context here, Stephen Lawrence, former councillor of Dubbo Regional Council, also sits on this committee. Stephen Lawrence didn't ask these questions. One of the other committee members asked the questions. So we then spent an inordinate amount of time discussing toilets, the type of structure of toilets, how many cubicles are in those toilets, the exact costing for toilets in Dubbo versus costing for toilets in other local government areas. So in my opinion, and my opinion only, this is not an official council position, I think there was a huge opportunity missed today, Tony. What a great opportunity to have a discussion with members of the Legislative Council about the number one issue for local government. Everywhere I go and speak about local government, the number one issue is financial sustainability. So the number one issue to talk about, and we drill down into whether you should pay $130,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 for toilets. We just passed a $180 million budget last night. We typically get in for capital expenses $20 to $30 million a year from state government. That's not counting federal government money. And we got bogged down on the discussion around toilets. And I did make that comment at the end. I said I found it very disappointing that with all of the big picture items, all of the things we could talk about at a big picture level, we got bogged down on toilets, which I felt, again, this is my personal view, I felt was all about political posturing rather than trying to gain good outcomes for the overall 128 councils across this state.
I like your turn of phrase there, bogged down. Looks like you might have found a few cracks in this inquiry.
Oh dear, it's getting worse, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that inquiry is, that's for sure.
Well, I'm pretty certain that the discussion we had around toilets is not going to be the number one issue that the Premier, Chris Minns, announces after this inquiry. I can't see him standing up and saying, we've solved the problem with how we can better fund local government. If we just built cheaper toilets, everything would be solved.
Yes, okay. Well, now talking about toilets, there's a topic I nearly forgot to ask you about, and that is, the topic actually comes up in the operational plan and associated documents around the budget. And one of the things discussed was the situation in relation to Cameron Park and the toilets there. It's been a very controversial subject in Wellington, of course. There's been a council survey done on it. So what's the determination on that now?
So you're right, this is part of the budget, the adoption of the $180 million budget, and there were some minor changes made to that resolution of council, and this is one of those. And interesting enough, at the inquiry, it was brought up about the preference, supposedly, for the community to have single cubicle toilets. And I did actually make mention that Cameron Park, once those changes have been made by the last council with single cubicle toilets, then the Wellington community has been very vocal since then to say that these toilets are not adequate for the needs of the community. So I said we'll be making some changes there at some point in the near future. And again, the disappointing part about that is that you've got a number of changes that will happen which will cost the community money because the decisions weren't made correctly in the first place. Now, the actual resolution that talked about the toilets, one of the items that was there was that we've had some workshops about these toilets before in Cameron Park, and for us to be able to make a decision and to put some dollars around it, we needed more information. So the resolution from last night said that no determination on the funding options be made, but a report be brought back to council that gives detailed drawings and detailed costings for alternative configurations. And that was one of the problems in a previous workshop. There were a number of alternative configurations discussed, but we didn't actually know how much they were going to cost, and we also didn't know how they would be configured, how it would be set up. And then we also, in the resolution last night, looked at some other funding models for the Cameron Park toilets, including VPAs from Ungla Wind Farm, for example. So look at how we might fund those toilets, because again, as you know, as you've talked about many times, Tony, it was a poor decision in the past council, to take away the number of cubicles, the multiple cubicles that we had before, and replace it with those single cubicles, which is hurting Wellington because buses, people just with a big family can't stop there now. There aren't enough toilets to service them. So we need to fix that, but we need to fix it right, and we need to do it as economically as possible.
So there we have it, folks. Dubbo Regional Council's not just papering over the cracks in relation to the Cameron Park toilet issue, which is really good to hear. As part of that discussion, Matthew, fees and charges for water access and usage at North Yeovil came up, and you're going to be changing those to reflect the Cabon Shire Council adopted fees and charges. Yeovil is divided between two council areas, which has created a bit of an issue here. One of the things I didn't see in the results of the release from council, whether North Yeovil charges would be going up and down. Do you have any comments?
Absolutely. So as people would be aware, if they're around that Yeovil or North Yeovil area, Buckenbar Creek is the boundary between North Yeovil and Yeovil. And what happens on Buckenbar Creek is North Yeovil is in Dubbo Regional Council. The other side of Buckenbar Creek, Yeovil, is in Cabon Shire Council. it would be a bit silly for Dubbo Regional Council, or back in the old Wellington Shire Council days, it'd be a bit silly for water to be taken from the Wellington Shire Council and the Wellington treatment plant all the way out to North Yeovil, when literally across the creek you've got water servicing that. So Cabonne Shire Council provide water across to North Yeovil. That's been an arrangement in place for some time. The problem is that the charges that we charge for water in our LGA don't match what Cabonne Shire charges for water. We've already started discussions about a boundary adjustment, so it would make sense for North Yeovil to be in Yeovil, North Yeovil to be in Cabonne Shire Council. So with those boundary adjustments, we've talked about a range of things, and one of the things that comes up is the fact that we charge North Yeovil residents a certain amount for their water, and then we get invoiced by Cabonne for that water, which is a different amount. So we thought it made more sense to have the residents of North Yeovil charged by Dubbo Regional Council the same amount that we are charged by Cabonne. That'll be probably the first step in, presumably at some stage in the near future, the boundary adjustment will occur and North Yeovil will be just part of Cabonne Shire Council.
Okay, that's pretty good. Another issue, of course, that's been in discussion for some time, and we haven't actually discussed this before, but there's a bit of a squirrel problem going on, and council's concerned that it might be squirreling away a lot of opportunities and resources when it comes to, I guess, the environment and building. So you might like to elaborate on that.
This is the problem, Tony. We don't know whether we've got a squirrel glider problem or not. And this is one of the things that we had a long discussion about. In fact, it's quite interesting. This discussion was really about $60,000. There's a thing, Tony, known as Parkinson's Law of Triviality. And that says, in paraphrasing terms, that the amount of time any committee takes to debate a topic is inversely proportional to the amount of dollars involved. And I would say that we proved that law of triviality last night because we spent a small amount of time debating the budget, not a huge amount of time. That was $180 million. We spent a long time debating squirrel glider or squirrel gliders, and that was a $60,000 problem. The issue was this. 6 years ago, a squirrel glider was seen on Camp Road near or in a development that is proposed to occur. So the proponent in this needed to pay some biodiversity offset credits, 85 he needed to retire, for him to be able to go ahead with this development because that squirrel glider, that one squirrel glider spotted in 2018, needed to have some offset somewhere in the state. No one can find that squirrel glider since. Doesn't prove the squirrel glider's not there. The habitat hasn't changed dramatically enough, so it's still the correct habitat for a squirrel glider or a squirrel glider family, but again, the problem is that we're not really sure if it's there, and this is where the discussion really focused. There was some legal advice that says, or some advice from experts, if you like, that says that unless the habitat's changed dramatically, then the squirrel glider could be there, so you need to pay those credits. This went back and forth, around in circles a little bit, but ultimately councillors said, we feel comfortable in the fact that the squirrel glider is probably no longer there, probably no family squirrel gliders there. It seems unfair to charge the developer $60,000, and that $60,000 wouldn't go to that squirrel glider because we can't find him. It would go to the Biodiversity Conservation Trust Fund to be used somewhere in the state for some squirrel glider conservation. So it could be 500 kilometres away, Tony. It could be 1,000 kilometres away. It's not really going to benefit the squirrel glider population in Dubbo. The other part, I think, that influenced councillors in this was the mere fact that one of the staff was asked about how much of the area was cleared, how much was this developer basically wiping out a whole range of natural areas, or was this development being done in a sympathetic way? And the staff member said that there wasn't a lot being cleared, there was enough being cleared for people to be able to develop there, but it seemed like it was being done in quite a sympathetic way. And so I think that had a bit of an influence on councillors. In the end, we said, remove the condition of consent that requires the 85 credits to be retired. That will save the developer $60,000. We've got a housing crisis. Let's get on, do the development and build more houses.
Yes, well, interesting, isn't it? We have to conserve our environment, but we've also got to do it in a way that doesn't waste a lot of time and money.
And
so that's the problem, isn't it?
This has certainly consumed a large amount of time and money already. It may well have cost more than $60,000 already in terms of consultants and experts. It probably hasn't, but I'm sure there's been a cost to the developer already, a cost to our staff. Obviously, we've got staff time, we've got advice, expert advice, legal advice. So there's no doubt about it. There are some problems, in my opinion, with the Biodiversity Conservation Act. So it's nice to have some conservation of biodiversity, but you've got to do it within reason as well. And sometimes there are many councils in regional areas that feel like these are rules and laws written more for city areas rather than regional areas.
Yeah, all right. And we've been talking to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council. Thank you for your time, Matthew.
Always my pleasure to talk, Tony.
And you're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.